we are never truly lost. Well, okay, sure. Maybe we get turned around for a few days in the woods, where life just feels like it's getting the best of us and everything's going wrong. And I'm Mike Martin, and I've stood right where you're standing, lost, beaten down, like nothing's ever gonna change. And that's why I built this camp. And that's why I'm inviting you to join me and all the members of this wild community. Because you know what, friend? It does get better. So come along with me into the wild and let me show you this awesome, unique skill set that lays within inside of you. With help from the land, we're going to unlock the steward that's inside each and every one of us that will lead the way out of the darkness and into healing. Here at the Camp of Healing on Project Mindfully Outdoors. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Project Mindfully Outdoors. As always, I'm your host and your guide, Mike Martin. And, it's been a very, very busy couple of months around camp. There's been a lot going on, a lot of changes, a lot of progress. And none of that progress would be possible without your support. And for that, I want to thank you. I truly, sincerely want to just take a moment to celebrate the connection and, you know, the support and everything else that comes with it. And part of that support and that growth has come with the help of my friends at my medic. And, for that, I've become truly grateful. And I think it's really cool how throughout life we get tossed into situations, and regardless of the outcome, we always end up making the best of it because we're kind of faced with the fact that no matter how far down the path we go, we're always there. It's like you can walk a couple of miles, yet you can never get away from yourself. So you build this idea of having to face yourself and having to get to know who you are. And a lot of that comes through personal experience as well as reflection. And the reflection part kind of ties into meditation, which is something that I live by nowadays. I love that ability and the power that meditation gives. It really becomes something that you're able to not only put the pen in your hand, but also craft the paper upon which you're writing your journey and your story. You get to add meaning, you get to find purpose for why it is you're here and why you're taking the steps that you're taking. And then when you do that in a way that you're open to the experience, you're open to the feelings, the possibilities, it helps you to navigate and it helps you to find your true north, which is why I'm really excited to share this conversation with you today. Because my guest, Michael DiPietro, who's the author of a book called The Inside Guide, does the exact same sort of thing that I do, just in a different context. He really embodies the power of meditation. And, I think that this is one of those conversations that you're going to enjoy, but you're also going to learn so much about why it is that building a practice around meditation is so fundamental. And, I'm going to get back to packing up and getting ready to head back from my hike and my adventure today. And on the flip side of this word from our sponsor, we're going to go ahead and jump into the conversation. And I'll see you on the flip side.
Well, spring is here, and I'm sure you're wondering how you can take your adventure up to the next level, right? I mean, we're always looking for that sort of new boost. So you want to know a secret? I've been turning to my good friends at FreshCap to take advantage of all the amazing natural boosts that come from mushrooms. That's right. And the results, well, they speak for themselves. Backed by a 100% rock-solid customer happiness guarantee. I'm positive you're going to love the results as well. You know, FreshCap has been with us right from the start of this journey. They were the first one to sign on and to back me on this mission, and throughout that time, I've really come to trust and rely on their amazing products. So give yourself a little bit of added self-care this spring by adding the ultimate mushroom to your self-care regimen and take your adventure to the next level. Just visit freshcap.com or hit the link in the show notes. And while you're there, use promo code ProjectMindfullyOutdoors10 to save 10% on your order today. That's freshcap.com and promo code ProjectMindfullyOutdoors10. All right, so obviously my background, as I shared with you a little bit, and as far as how I got into meditation, and your background is, I can imagine, a lot more, not only diverse, but intense. But I think that there's this overwhelming theme that it benefits to be able to kind of get to know yourself, because there's a quote that I was reading actually this morning in the middle of the night that goes, no matter where you go, you're always there. Because if you can't get away from yourself, and I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on that as we get started.
Sure. You know, meditation has a lot of different uses for people. And I think one of the most important uses is learning to let the mind calm down so we can be more present in ourselves, in that authentic place. And a lot of times when we're not in the agenda of the mind, we can tend to the present moment much more clearly. We can respond to people. We can show up more as ourselves without an agenda. Am I coming across okay? All this talk that goes on in the mind. And I think in terms of anxiety, sometimes anxiety has a lot to do with getting out in front of ourselves. We're projecting a little too much into our future. And what I find is usually, like anxiety, it's a simple formula, but anxiety is getting too far in the future and depression is getting too far in the past. And so if we can come into the present and learn to be more present to just this moment and realize I'm actually safe and secure in this moment. And what do I think is the cause of my anxiety? See, it's really just something going on in the mind about what I think is going to happen in the future or what I think is happening in this moment. But if you actually drop into your body and into the present moment, hey, we're actually quite well. Right? There's nothing to be anxious about. We got a roof over our head. We're getting fed. So I think in some cases it's triggering a primal fight or flight fear in people, just like when you're in the hunt and that animal senses threat, it's going to fight or flight. And we have that same mechanism in us as human beings. And so one of the first keys to breaking through anxiety is realizing our inherent safety, that there is not actually a threat. And a lot of times our brain will perceive a threat, but there isn't actually one. And so once we can begin to drop in and realize there's an inherent safety in the moment, a lot of the anxiety just begins to drop away.
See, I love the way that you put that. And there was even a context in there that I don't think I really thought too much about along the line until recently, and especially when you said so, is the fact that with depression, you are indeed looking backwards. You're retelling and rehashing all these old stories. And then that anxiety, it does represent the future because we don't know what is in store for us down the path. So part of our process is to kind of try to tie a story to that as well. And we draw a lot from the past, saying, we've experienced this when we walked that trail over there. That's got to be what's ahead. And then we get all worked up about it. But when you do center yourself and you start to slow down, it's almost like you have this ability to start to draft a new narrative.
Yeah. Or even no narrative.
Which, is actually probably the best. And I think that it could be one of the stumbling points, though, really, because we always feel like we got to know.
Yeah.
If we can't look and see it, then we have to put a story around it.
But well, Mike, you're getting into some really profound concepts, because the unknown is what a lot of people struggle against, but it's the true nature of our existence. And we're living an unknown existence most of the time. And when we can get our mind around that and be okay with it and realize we don't have to know. I spent some time in a monastery, and one of the monks was an old farmer from Kansas, and he'd spent his entire life in a monastery. And he was towards the end of his life, he was in his late 80s. And he came out of the chapel one day and he had this glint in his eyes. And he said, and I go, Emmanuel, what's going on? And he goes, God's got me on a need to know basis. And so I thought that was hilarious. There's someone who's devoted his whole life to a spiritual path, and he's affirming that there's most of his existence that he doesn't know about, and that we're all on a need to know basis. And we know what the little piece of the pie that we know, but most of it is unknown. Most of it is a mystery unfolding. And
it's when you relinquish yourself, though, and you find joy in that it becomes the real adventure. I know for me, there's been a lot of that turmoil with the unknown, but on the other side of it, when you step through it, that's where a lot of the greatest things happen in life.
100%. I agree with you 100% there. And I think for some people, it has a little bit to do with their risk tolerance too, because it's like if I take a step off that cliff, is there going to be a bridge?
Most definitely. It is scary, and a lot of the story that we write for ourselves is written based on like this concept of self-suffering. We're always looking for the worst case scenario. And if you're able to kind of put that book to the side and just pick up a blank pen and paper, I feel like, you're opening up a whole new world to yourself. You're able to really mold and build the reality that you're living in.
That's great. There's some thoughts that come to mind when you talk about self-suffering and people's story. Is a lot of times people could be aware of it, but what is it that keeps people from being able to put that story aside? What's going on at a deeper level such that there's an attachment to the story? And a lot of times that's under the surface. There's some of these fears, primal fears. Who will I be? Will people still interact with me the same way? I've gotten by with that story for so many years, and I don't know who I'd be or how I'd operate without it. Right. And so I always look when we're talking about a process of saying, okay, I want to put a story aside or get a new story. it's always useful to look at the attachments. What has that story done for me? What has it brought me? And how can I preserve the good things it's brought me while I let go of the story? Because maybe the story worked on some level, right? And it could be a self-suffering story, but maybe I learned fortitude and strength out of my self-suffering. Maybe some good things came out of it that I actually want to keep in my life, and let go of the suffering part of it, but keep the strength that I gained from going through that.
Well, when I think about that kind of concept and I bring that into the field, I think about, you know, the evolution process of going from getting maybe your first Daisy air gun as a kid, realizing that,
That was the first gun I had.
and realizing, hey, I really enjoy this. I get the benefits of learning how to build this as a hobby, but being that little kid, especially for me, I got to spend time with my grandfather. And then as you get older, you step up to a 22. And then you start getting out into the squirrel woods and chasing small game. And you realize, man, I still got that same thrill, but now I got this whole new map that I get to run around. And I got this new tool that helps me actually put some food on the table and contribute. And then you venture off and you step up to the next gauge, and eventually, well, in my case, that led me more to leaning into archery, but it leads you into the deer woods or whatever the case may be. And it's that willingness to say, hey, I've got this map here. I got this skill set that I built on it. Let me venture into what the next step of the course is going to become. And just walking that path, even though it was unknown, it's in a safe context. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to put those self-suffering narratives around it to feel like I've got some control.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a really great metaphor for the developmental process in people too, is that step up, of each phase where you had a different rifle and all the way up to archery. That's also kind of how human beings progress. And we always need to have something better to replace it. If we're letting go of something, we have to have something, the next stage to replace it with. Some of us don't. Like, if you're mystically inclined like me, I don't like I like keeping it completely undefined. But for most human beings, we want that next stepping stone. We want that next rung on the ladder. We want to know that sense of, okay, now I've got that under my belt, but this is the next place I'm going to in my life. And so I think that's a really beautiful metaphor that you have with your progression through the weapons there.
And, overall, I think, when I look back to that time in life, knowing that the bigger picture was going to be getting into the deer woods and going on those family hunts, chasing whitetail and whatnot. But you got to realize that you don't just snap your fingers and go from the Daisy air rifle to being out on the deer hunt. You got to work your way through the progression. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time, I think we set our goals and we see that big picture and we forget about all those little stepping stones that get in there. Like, we don't have the patience to actually work the process.
Yeah, we call that, in the field of neuro-linguistic programming, we call that chunk size. So some people, and the metaphor I use for that is like eating an apple. Some people try to swallow the whole apple in one bite, but you really got to go bite by bite by bite and make sure you're breaking down your vision or your goals. If you want to create something in your life, I could have a grand vision and, I want to be operating at this certain level, but it has to ground out into what I'm doing today. So if the vision is too big, sometimes there's no link to the practicality of today and what can I actually accomplish today or the next day or the next day. And so I think that step by step is not just a progression, but also like a way that we chunk down so that it's manageable, but always keeping our eye on that bigger vision.
And when I think about it in that concept, though, it draws me back to the range and back to those early moments of learning that there was the ability within myself to meditate and meditate with a purpose. I was centering in on the target. And when I brought that out of the range and into the concrete world, I started to realize that, yeah, I had these big goals, these big aspirations for myself, this project being one of them. But I had to kind of look at the smaller steps to get to where I see things going.
Mm-hmm.
And also give myself the grace to realize that not every one of those steps is going to be perfect. It's not going to always fall and flow in the right way. Sometimes I'll even fall on my face. And I feel like those are some of the skills that the empathy and the ability to plan. I feel there's some of the skills that bringing meditation off to the range and into the concrete world has really helped to foster.
That's again pretty profound. I like that, porting it over. I also think like sometimes we get focused on the destination and we forget about the journey. As much as let's use hunting as a metaphor, as much as actually getting the kill, it's as much of getting out into the woods and stalking and the whole process and preparing, even when you're packing your car to leave, and it's the whole journey. And then you got the afterwards too, if you got to clean the animal and so
Right.
There's a lot to it, right? And so I think it's really, if we look at that also as a metaphor for our vision, we have a destination, we have some place we want to get to, but can we even enjoy the route, and the road we're taking to get there, so that every moment is enjoyable, every moment is fulfilling, even while we're en route to our goal or our destination.
See, I love that metaphor because it brings up so many different angles and aspects that I've experienced, not only with my own pursuits, but also in taking people out in the field. Because you get this kind of like glorified presentation on TV. You see them kind of sitting there in the blind for a minute. Maybe they're talking, promoting some gear or whatever. And the next thing you know, they're taking down a trophy buck. And somewhere along the line, probably because it wasn't exactly fitting for the story and time constraints, you missed all the actual sitting and all the actual work. And a lot of the time when I take a lot of new hunters out, that's kind of their background. And that's what they think hunting is. When we get out there and there's not, the animal instantly right there in front of them, ready to go, they get bored. They want to go home. And then you got to explain to them, it's allowing yourself to embrace the factors around you, and even with it being the time of the year, it's cold, right? It can be wet, snowy. You got to embrace the suck. And a big part of the story in getting to these destinations that we're trying to go and being able to enjoy it and have the grace and the gratitude for it is embracing that suck factor. It's the adversity, allowing yourself to really face and see what you're made of inside.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of the process in life is waiting sometimes, just like you're sitting in the blind and you're waiting, nothing's happening. It's the quality of our waiting, or can we make that okay? Well, oh boy, it's not a peak experience right now, but again, it's not just sucky sometimes, but even just neutral. Sometimes people sometimes want the ups and downs and the sucky part, but I think sometimes what's even harder is the boredom, like you said, and just being okay with nothing happening for a moment. Like, all right.
And a lot of the time I'll explain it like basically we're going to get there, but we're sitting here, we're staring through our binoculars, we're doing this, we're doing that in order to work the area. And if you can work that area mentally as you're trying to get to the goals that you're trying to achieve, I feel like it strengthens so much more, because there is much more than a physical aspect of getting up in the morning, going to work, earning a paycheck, and then buying the things that you're looking for. There's many, many more smaller attributes to life that make the story that much more fulfilling and that much worth living. And it's taken the time to really slow down and see those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. When you slow down, you actually perceive more, right? I mean,
right.
The subtlety of life is more present.
What was it? Augustus's famous saying, "Haste with slowness," as in move forward fast, but do so slowly and cautiously.
Yeah.
Therefore, you are still maintaining that progress. However, you're doing so at a pace that you're really sucking in everything around you. You're really able to start using everything that's there to build the vocabulary of the page and of the paragraph even that you're living in this moment.
Yeah. I love how you're using we talk about in the book that I just wrote, we talk about purpose a lot and finding your purpose. And some people think it like it's going to be something different or something grandiose, but I love how you're finding it in your adventure and bringing consciousness and mindfulness into what you're doing already, and taking that natural place where you like to hang out and turning that into your purpose. And I think that's really rich. I think that's what a lot of people need to hear, is you can stay in your passions in life, and you can stay what really lights you up and what you love to do. And it's really what you bring into those activities and how you kind of work with that as your purpose that makes the difference, I think. So I think there's no right section of the world. Like, you don't have to be teaching meditation directly to bring meditation into a hunt, and
Right.
it's living purpose where you are, and living purpose every day.
And to get back to where we started, I feel like that's kind of how I've discovered myself and the ability to sit comfortably with myself, is within my safe space, which just happens to be the wilderness, whether
Mm-hmm.
I'm hunting, fishing, whatever it is. And being able to uncover that ability within to, bring the meditation into my personal practice was through movement.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for when you're on the water. There's no right or wrong way, as I've obviously come to learn when it comes to meditation. It's whatever works for you, whatever gives you the space to tap into yourself and get to know yourself. Then you start to discover really what your purpose is and what it is that makes you feel fulfilled.
Yeah, I agree. Um, One of the things I want to kind of touch into is how the inner and the outer can link up. And this kind of, sometimes we feel like we have our inner world and then we have the world outside. But they're really a reflection of each other. And there's a concept that everything we see and experience in the world is a projection from within our own mind. And I find that fascinating in a way. Like, this outer world is all one big playground for us that we're projecting from our inner consciousness. And when you look at it that way, then you can see the whole thing as programmable. I can begin to shift my inner world to shift the outer world, and shift who shows up and what shows up. So it's a fun tool if we begin to look at the inner and the outer reflecting each other.
I feel like that really empowers the storytelling concept, as far as the whole ability to live the life that you feel fulfilled with, that you're obviously pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Is, yeah, there's different aspects that you have to go through and you have to do, but you can shift it and you can create it and do it in a way that you enjoy, no matter what the case may be.
Yeah. So I think the key to that is first finding it within yourself and finding what does joy feel like in your body. When, like, yeah, I can go find it when I'm watching a sunset, right? Or, deep in the woods, but can I find that same joy when I'm stuck in traffic? Right.
And it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. In fact,
Right.
there's a part in Meditations that I really love that speaks to it, where Marcus Aurelius is talking about how, everybody wants to go on vacation to their villas and this and that. And even at times he craved to do so himself, but you can get that same peace and that same joy just by turning inward.
100%.
And
That's
and as you build that internally and you start to define it, it reflects and it does the inward outward thing, because then the world around you becomes that exact same picture of joy and
yeah.
happiness.
Now you're speaking my language there.
And you touched on something that I read on your site that I really wanted to dive into before we start talking about the book, is feelings and emotions.
Sure.
And I want to kind of walk down the path a little bit about how meditation helps you to not only process, but understand where those are coming from.
Okay. So I think there's two types of people. There's people who generally are emotional people. I'm kind of one of them. I need to have my emotions to process. And then I think there's people who take on other people's emotions. They're kind of more open emotionally. And so I think the first thing to ask is, when we're feeling something, is it mine or is it someone else's? Because a lot of times we're picking up on other people's stuff and we're processing other people's emotions. A lot of times, even from childhood, some of the emotional things that we're processing were our parents or even our grandparents. There's a lot of family inheritance of emotions sometimes. And we feel like, gosh, where is this coming from? Why am I getting stuck in these feelings? But a lot of times they cannot be one's own feelings. They're just, we're trying to kind of live out someone else's feelings on a certain level. So I think that's the first thing to begin to sort out is this mine or is this someone else's? And if it's someone else's, we can respectfully let them have it, let it go and let it go back to whoever it was, because that's the most compassionate thing we can do, is not noodle around in someone else's emotional experience and just begin to get clear about our own emotions. And then I think the next step, if it is our own authentic emotion, is to begin to have an emotional intelligence around it that begins to label what it is you're actually feeling, right? Is this fear, anger, joy, sadness? So kind of beginning to sense it, and not only just sense it, but sense it in the body, because the unique thing about emotions is we'll tend to feel them in the body. And so if we're just in our mind trying to figure something out, we're not actually feeling what the emotion is a lot of times. And so I think the intelligence says, like, I'm pretty clear a lot of the times. I've been doing this work for a lot of years, and I had a lot of trauma from childhood, but mostly I don't get that emotional anymore. But a couple of days ago, I kind of went into a little funk, and my energy was really down, and I didn't know what was going on. And so my practice was just to sit with it. I put all the work aside, and I just put all my appointments aside, and I really sat in what was going on. And it felt very unpleasant. I gotta say, it wasn't a pleasant practice, But just by bringing awareness to it, just by noticing it and sitting with it, it began to subside after a few hours. And I think that's a powerful practice. If it's our emotion and we need to sit with it, we can begin to feel what's going on. And then a lot of times it'll open up into maybe something from our past. Maybe it's something going on that I wasn't aware of in my present. But much of the time, sometimes the emotion can be authentic in the moment, and sometimes the emotion can be coming from our past, something that is unresolved in our past. And I'm just doing a replay of something from my childhood or something from my past, and I just haven't resolved it. So, and that's usually how you can get wind of that, is if we start to look at repeating patterns, something like every few days, this nasty feeling comes up, or okay, well, that's suspect a little. Then I want to start pulling that thread and see maybe that's coming from my past, right? If it looks like it's something that seems to be happening on a regular basis, it's most likely not authentic to the present moment.
See, and I feel like that was actually the other end of the spectrum, because here we've talked so much about the glorious and positive, happy sides of meditation. There are important things to point out, that you do get those uncomfortable sensations and moments.
Sure.
I know a lot of my initial time at the beginning was spent sitting in those uncomfortable, hard, difficult kind of moments. But it's giving yourself that space to be able to start to work your way there. If it's hard at the time, it's okay to get up and walk away for a little bit, come back. Like we said and mentioned a couple of times, there's no right or wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever works for you. And you progress through all these things that are unresolved or lingering traumas. You progress through them at your own pace. But taking that stillness and that time to get there is really where you got to put your feet to the ground. And like the saying goes, it works when you work it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do those things, that's kind of where the happier, brighter side of meditation starts to come into things a little bit more often.
Yeah.
And it's a very effective way of bringing balance to yourself.
Yeah. I think, there's a certain type of person, they call it spiritual bypass, where they think it all has to be light and joy and unicorns all the time, right? But true spirituality is the light and the dark together, and being able to work with the shadow parts and the negative parts of our experience. And so I think a really powerful tool is to begin to foster the state of acceptance. And let me explain that, because acceptance doesn't mean condoning something that's harmful or negative, but acceptance means an acknowledgement of what is actually occurring, whether it be pleasant or unpleasant, right? And so the more we can do that, a lot of times people will feel something very negative in themselves, and then on top of that, they judge themselves on top of it, right? So now you not only have the negative thing, but then you got your judging mind coming in saying I'm bad or wrong for feeling that, right? So when we can have an antidote for that judging mind and say, okay, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm whole and complete, but I just seem to be having this painful experience here. And you can begin to say, okay, if I accept that the experience is occurring, then you can begin to explore it. Then you can begin to unpack it. You can begin to resolve it and find out where it's coming from. So that's usually what I encourage, is first noticing, right? That's the first step. You got to have an inquiry and actually notice what's going on. And then you got to accept that it's occurring without resistance.
The resistance thing is one of those tricky lines, though. It's almost, it can bring you to a point where you feel like you're stuck.
Yeah.
Almost like you're just spinning your wheels endlessly. And then finally, if you stick with it long enough, you just hit that moment where all of a sudden you break free and you're flying down the road.
Yeah. But what if we could make resistance okay? Like even resistance is fine. That just means resistance means something scary in your system's just trying to protect you from it. It might just mean you're not ready to see the full brunt of what's occurring, So I try to honor resistance. Sometimes when I'm working with a client, they're resisting the process, and I just go, okay, you win, because they're using their power, and that's an edge for them. And that's a message to me that, okay, well, that's the edge, that we can just hang out there. We don't have to try to force anything or go backwards, but let's just explore that edge, and let's see what the resistance is about there, if we just honor it and let it be okay.
And I think that brings up the idea of what's around the next hill. You know, I mean, spending the fall in the field, 9 times out of 10, I'm sitting there on whatever high point I can find, binoculars in hand, looking to try to find what's over that ledge. Until finally I say, hey, I'm sick of doing this. I'm going to get up. I'm going to move. And then I go explore it and find out what's over there. We never know what's on the other side of that. And I think, honestly, it's probably a good transition into talking about what led you to write your current book.
Well, I felt like I've been doing this work for 30 years. So I felt like I had a book in me for many, many years. And I have a little bit of a learning disability. Sometimes writing was really difficult for me. And I'm like, well, how am I going to write a book if I can't write? And so it took me just kind of putting it aside. And then about 2 years ago, I had a moment of inspiration, and the whole outline for the book came through in about an hour, and I just wrote down it really quickly, and it became so clear, the structure for the book. And I was like, okay, how am I going to write this thing now that clearly Spirit wants me to write this book right now. It just came through like that. So now I got to figure out how to write it. And it's always been easier for me to talk about things. And when I have someone to talk to, it flows pretty naturally for me. But if I was staring at a blank page, there's no one to talk to, so I have nothing to say. And so I went and meditated, and 3 times got the message of one of my clients, Marcy Donnelly, who kept coming up in my meditation as the person I'm supposed to write this book with. And when I reached out to Marcy, she said, oh my gosh, yes, I've been waiting my whole life for a project like this. And we started collaborating by having these dialogues, and we would, there's an app called Otter, and we would transcribe our conversations and get the text and edit it and put it into the outline. And so we did that on a weekly basis, and that's how we got the book written. So essentially I spoke the book to Marcy. And then what turned out was Marcy and I just worked so well together. We just kept doing this project, and she kept drawing more of the content out of me, and just like, oh, when you said that piece, it was totally fascinating. Tell me more about that. And then how do you apply that in a practical way? And just these wonderful questions that she would ask. And so she was bringing more content out. And so in the book, we actually left a lot of the conversation in place, and we have key concepts, we have exercises, we have a lot of things to break up the text and make it more enjoyable as a reading experience. But I would say it was a long time coming, 20 years coming, and it finally came through. And I think that what it taught me is that you don't have to stop just because you think you have a limitation. There's always a workaround. There's always some way you can use that limitation. If I say, well, I'm not a good writer, okay, great. Well, that's an advantage. That got me to do this really unique process of speaking the book, and it worked so much better. And it was just a joy to work it that way. So that's kind of how we did it.
See, I love that backstory to the writing process. And it's another one of those really unique ways to showcase how sometimes in order to get things done in life and achieve what it is we want to do, like you mentioned, that book's been many years in the process. It was something you wanted to do for a long time. We've got to break those stigmas that are internally.
Yeah. I mean, part of it could be I just needed to grow up and be, I'm still growing up at age 58. So, maybe I needed to get to a level of maturity before I could really apply myself in that way. I've been in this field for a long time, but to write a book is a big endeavor. And I personally, I think it's good to have help. So we need to build community. We need to think about our relationships, our families, our support network. I clearly could not have done this project alone. And I wish Marcy was here because she always brings a beautiful perspective of it too. But it's a collaboration, and I believe in the power of the right relationship.
I have to totally agree with you. I mean, as I mentioned, it is a beautiful example of all these different things, pillars that we talk about being so important in progressing our stories. And I've got one last question for you as our time starts to wind down here. From all of your journey, you have to leave us with some inspiration and a key factor that's going to help us to move forward.
Very simple little question.
Hey, at least you don't have to write it all out.
Regardless of your wounds, everybody is wounded in some way, but the wound is your gift. Wound is also spelt the same way as wound. If we're wound up in something, it's about unwinding it and realizing that where we've been wounded is where we have a very unique and special perspective on life. And so, as an example, I grew up in a very large family, and I felt very alone. And so I had a wound of feeling isolated and lonely, right? But that wound makes me very intelligent about relationship and connection. And where I feel really called is to build community and bring people together. And so every wound, we think, oh, I'm wounded in this way, but it's an opportunity. It's a gift. And so if we begin to really go down into those deep parts and feel where we've been wounded in our childhood or in our past, and use that as a portal, as a way to go through, to not only break through to our center, to who we really are, but also to realize our purpose in the world. That's what I feel is very useful for people. And that if we can begin to build a culture where it's acceptable and normal to do that, we're going to grow we're going to grow as individuals, we're going to grow as a society, and we're going to be able to make the changes as a society that we need to make, because there's a lot of dysfunction in the world right now. And I think a lot of it is because people project outward and they get externalized in looking for the answer outside of themselves. But each person, every listener that's listening to this, you are a fountain of wisdom. You are a source and you are a guide in your own right. And everything you're looking for is within you. So I think the key is to realize that you are your own guide. We don't need priests or gurus. They're always helpful, and I'm a guide and I help people in this work. But ultimately, I'm pointing people to their own inner authority, to their own wisdom that's inside of them, because that's where the gold is for each and every person. So that would be my answer.
Well, brother, I have to admit that is not only very well said, but I believe that is probably one of the best answers I've received to that question.
No, thank you.
And, you hit the nail on the head there. As much as we always say, we're all very unique, it is true. And it's really that uniqueness comes from the parts that we try to hide. Sometimes it's okay to just be good with the experience that you had, because they're laid out along your course specifically for you to make you who you are. And there's no shame in tapping into that and embracing it and celebrating it. And that's what we've had the opportunity to do here in this conversation, is celebrate two different avenues to the same exact perspective. We go about telling it in a different context, which is what broadens the picture, makes that community much wiser and much larger. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I show the book to people?
Absolutely.
So the name of the book is The Inside Guide, Breaking Through to Intuitive Wisdom and Inspired Living. And you can get it on Amazon or on my website, which is www.loveguidesus. So it's loveguides.us. And that's because love is the true guide within us, and it resides in our hearts. So that's the guide. So that's our website, Love Guides Us, and you can get, there's a link to get the book there, and we got workshops, and uh, we got a free study group for the book. Mostly, we want to just support people to do this work and to wake up and to lead the life you were destined to lead, just like you're doing, Mike. So you're doing great work here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Most definitely. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity. And before I do let you go, if there's any other way that people can get in touch with you, you have to let them know as well.
We're on all the social media. It's the best thing is to go through the website, and there's links to everything on the website. So there's a link to get the book on Amazon. There's a link to our Instagram, our Facebook, all the social media. I think we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. But I don't know the URLs for all those, but they're all on the website.
You sound as bad as I am a lot of the time. Social media is just not my thing.
Yeah,
It's one of
it's my
those sad
business partner's thing.
requirements.
She's better at all that than I am. So,
Well, before I do let you go, I would love to put together a conversation with both of you and really explore the book.
oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, we're totally open to that. Marcy's just an amazing woman. She's an organizational wizard. I'll just tout her a little bit because she has organized, and she's just a dynamic woman. She's got a full-time job, and she has written this book with me, and she raises a family, and she's in PTA, and she manages all this with ease and grace, and she's just a joy to work with. So I feel like I hit the jackpot on a working relationship there. So,
That is a beautiful blessing, though.
yeah. So Marcy, yeah, we're definitely always open to coming back and chatting. There's a real dynamic in our relationship too. So I think it's fun for listeners to see how we work together and how we interact.
I love that. We'll definitely be looking forward to putting that one together as well.
Very good.
All right, that is it. That is all. And that is the end of yet another edition of the Project Mindfully Outdoors Campfire Sessions. And before we wrap this up, though, I really want to tie things together because, meditation, regardless of how you're introduced to it, is really one of the most powerful tools along these journeys of self discovery and exploration. And to be able to put it in a context that involves getting outdoors, connecting with nature, I think really brings us back to our heritage and to our roots, where we came from. Because after all, man, the story of mankind didn't just start within the concrete jungle. It was many, many decades of work and a very extremely long journey to get from the wilderness to the concrete world. And to be able to tap into that, I think unlocks some of the most beautiful and powerful tools and really verbiage that you can utilize in order to overcome whatever obstacle makes you feel like you're stuck. And on that note, my friend, get out there in the wild because that's where the stillness and the adventure lies. See ya.